Tonight, rising tensions and falling markets. Trump fires back after China threatens to increase tariffs. The risk of an escalating trade war. As the Amazon burns, worldwide demands for action.
They're watching us happen.
But will Brazil listen?
And protesters arm in arm across Hong Kong. Will the peace hold through the weekend? This is The National.
As Justin Trudeau and other world leaders gather in France this weekend, they face two emerging challenges. One, an environmental catastrophe as fires roar through the Amazon rainforest. The other, an escalating trade war between the United States and China that has left investors spooked. Today, as both sides raised tariffs, markets plunged. The Dow Jones losing 623 points, the TSX 215 points. The rhetoric ratcheted up too, with Donald Trump unusually telling American companies operating in China to get out. Ellen Morrow now on the latest salvo and its potential impact.
Smiles at the closing bell, masking a volatile day. Stocks down as the trade war heats up again. On Twitter, a Trump tirade. The president writing, "Our great American companies are hereby ordered to immediately start looking for an alternative to China." Hours later, President Trump tweeted again, announcing tariff hikes to 30% and 15% on nearly all Chinese goods. Those increases after China threatened retaliatory tariffs of its own.
The whole world is going to lose in that there's a chance that the economic and trade frictions between China and the United States could be one of several factors which drives a global slowdown.
Still, the White House played it cool.
We don't run around the West Wing with anxiety. We look at the chessboard and we see basically a strong Trump economy.
But there are growing economic concerns. Fears of a recession loom.
Certainty is the cheapest kind of stimulus that there is to strengthen an economy, and we have the opposite of that.
President Trump is also attacking Jerome Powell, head of the Federal Reserve. He tweeted, "My only question is, who is our bigger enemy? Powell, who Trump appointed, or China's President Xi?"
The degree to which the tweets just drive a truck through Republican and market orthodoxies and the separation of American politics from the market, that is striking, and I know of no precedent in American history.
I am the chosen one. Somebody had to do it, so I'm taking on China.
Trump made that proclamation just 2 days ago. Now the trade war with China is more fraught than ever. Trump also once said trade wars were easy to win. This one, not so much. Ellen Morrow, CBC News, Washington.
Also on Trump's agenda today, a conversation with the president of Brazil offering help in fighting the wildfires consuming parts of the Amazon rainforest. It's a growing crisis that's promising to be front and center at the G7. Now, the pictures show charred devastation. The numbers show just how dire the situation is. Of the 76,000 wildfires recorded in Brazil so far this year, more than half have been inside the world's biggest rainforest, the one people call the lungs of the earth. Under global pressure to contain them, today Brazil's president said he's considering sending in the military. So the fires have not only grabbed headlines and a lot of attention online, they've also have world leaders calling for action, including Justin Trudeau, who added, "Our kids and grandkids are counting on us." Margaret Evans lays out the political pressure.
The shadows cast by the smoke of the Amazon as it burns have wrapped their way right around the world. European leaders today expressing their distress, led by the French President Emmanuel Macron. "Our house is burning," literally, he tweeted out. "The Amazon rainforest, the lungs which produce 20% of our oxygen, is on fire." Macron wants it to top the G7 summit he's hosting this weekend. France has also accused the Brazilian president, Jair Bolsonaro, of lying by playing down climate change concerns. And along with Ireland, France is also threatening to veto a major trade deal in the works between the EU and a group of Latin American countries, including Brazil. But the European Commission argues that signing the trade deal will bind Brazil to the Paris Accord on climate.
That's why we do welcome President Macron's intention to discuss this issue during the G7 meeting. The sense of urgency is indeed warranted.
That sense of urgency was reflected in European capitals today by protesters outside Brazilian embassies in Paris, Madrid, and here in London.
We've known that we have a climate emergency for many years. Politicians have said a lot of words, but action hasn't been taken.
They want that to change, especially with the summit in France.
But the wild card at the G7 summit, of course, will be the U.S. President Donald Trump, climate change doubter and perceived ally of the Brazilian president.
That could make things tricky for the British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who's backing Macron.
One of the things I'm going to be raising at the G7 is the horrific loss of habitats and species around the world.
But analysts say Johnson will also be eager to stay on Donald Trump's good side to keep the possibility of a post-Brexit trade deal with the United States alive.
He will want to be seen having an excellent relationship with Donald Trump, but I'm not sure how effective that is. And he has to balance that against the fact that Trump is very unpopular in the UK as well.
And with the images from the Amazon burning themselves onto the world's conscience, the pressure on the G7 leaders to find a way through and act has grown. Margaret Evans, CBC News, London.
In the search for why this fire crisis is happening, blame has zeroed in on two factors: deforestation and the president. An environmental watchdog group says the pace of deforestation in the Amazon has jumped 20% in the last 9 months. One reason, illegal logging. Another, fires are sometimes set to clear land for farming, and they can get out of control. Bolsonaro has spoken in favor in the past of expanding mining and farming in the Amazon, and he's tried to blame the fires on sabotage by environmental groups. So much of what drew the attention to this story initially was the horror of the pictures being shared online. Images like these, walls of flames, towers of smoke pouring out of lush green forest. Among those sharing these pictures on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, celebrities and politicians. The problem is not a single one of them is from the current Amazon fires. Kaylee Rogers keeps an eye on disinformation and misinformation for us. I think we'll see a lot of you in the run-up to the election. Did not expect we'd be talking about the Amazon, but what is wrong with these photos?
Well, there's a couple of things. Some of these are images of fires that took place in other places in the world, in Europe, in North America. Other ones really do show fires in the Amazon, but they're not these fires happening right now. One in particular was shared by Leonardo DiCaprio, was also shared by Emmanuel Macron, retweeted by Justin Trudeau, really making the rounds online. This particular image does show a fire in the Amazon, but it's really old. I found it online as old as 2012, and the photographer who took the photo actually died in 2003. So it's at least 16 years old, if not older.
Okay, it's old but effective. The facts of these fires are bad enough, but clearly these images are really stirring reaction. Is there one type of image that seems more effective than others?
I mean, obviously these really dramatic photos of fires are compelling, but people are also throwing in images of animals. Most of the time, these aren't actually related to the fires at all. There's one I found of a monkey. It's really compelling, but it's from India as early as 2016 and has nothing to do with the fires at all. I found an interview with the photographer who did mention that the baby monkey was okay.
This is really tricky because, you know, I can imagine people at home saying, what does it really matter? Is the fire burning any differently now than it was in 2016? The urgency is real. It is a global catastrophe. So what are the consequences of the imagery not being real?
And obviously these images are causing people to pay attention, which is arguably a really good thing. The problem is that when you're sharing fake images or false information, it gives ammunition to people who want to undercut or downplay the significance of these fires. So President Bolsonaro, for example, has already tried to deflect blame. He's tried to act like it's not as big of a deal as it is. So if he's able to point to all the posts on social media and say these images aren't real, and he's right, that's just giving him more ammunition to try to undercut this story.
Okay, Kaylee, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau arrived in France earlier tonight ahead of the G7, where that crisis in the Amazon will surely be discussed. Trudeau is expected to meet with several world leaders at the summit, but as David Cochran tells us, do not be surprised if Trudeau plays to a home audience.
This summit is Justin Trudeau's final international trip before the federal election, and he will use this summit to push issues quite familiar to a domestic audience. Trudeau's top priority here is economic growth, specifically growth for the middle and working class, which he argues is a shield against populism and social unrest. He will also try to advance issues such as gender equality and climate change, with the raging fires in the Brazilian rainforest serving as a timely example. But most of all, Canada and its G7 partners will be keen to avoid a repeat of the summit fiasco that happened last year in Charlevoix, Quebec. Leaders had reached a consensus on key issues, signing a final communique, only to have it all nuked by Donald Trump in a tweet storm from Air Force One. So the plan this time is to not even try to reach a consensus on a final declaration or unanimous communique. The leaders know they won't get Trump to agree on climate change. The U.S. is also offside on trade, embracing tariffs and economic nationalism. And on that point, at this summit, Trump has a kindred spirit in the new UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who is vowing to pull his country out of the European Union by the end of October. Trudeau will meet with both of those leaders while in France, Trump on Sunday, Boris Johnson on Saturday, where trade will be the big topic. Johnson is eager to sign an extended free trade agreement with Canada to ensure his economy has as smooth a landing as possible post-Brexit. David Cochran, CBC News, Biarritz, France.
One more trade note. In just over a week, the European Union will block access to some Canadian food producers. The EU will halt imports of certain Canadian fresh fruits and vegetables on September the 1st. We're talking cherries, apples, pears, some berries, along with peppers, potatoes, and tomatoes. But unlike Canada's agricultural trade disputes with China, which are largely seen to be political by some, the EU says it's simply trying to stop the spread of destructive plant pests. Canada's Food Inspection Agency and Agriculture Ministry call the move not unusual. EU officials say all other trading partners face the same restrictions. So now to the latest developments in Hong Kong, where they are bracing for more demonstrations. Ian?
And Adrian, this weekend marks 11 weeks of protests calling for democracy. It is already Saturday morning in Hong Kong, where protesters are promising to return to the airport, which they managed to shut down last week before violence broke out. This comes after a creative demonstration on the streets Friday night. Thousands of people joined arm in arm to form a peaceful human chain. Chris Brown shows us how the protesters are changing tactics.
They took to the streets of Hong Kong by the thousands, this time locking arms and shining flashlights as if they were beacons for freedom. Organizers called this the Hong Kong Way, named after a similar human chain formed 30 years ago as the Baltic nations of Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania fought for independence from the Soviet Union.
We're just fighting for something that we should have, which is one country, two systems.
The chain went on for 40 kilometers. Along the way, people held up the flags of friendly nations to say thank you.
And I can see people over the other side of the world are very supportive to us.
They sang songs of revolution, including this one from the famous musical Les Miserables. This will be the 12th straight weekend of anti-government protests that show little sign of dissipating as demonstrators push to limit China's political influence in the territory. Still, Alan Kam acknowledged they're up against long odds.
It always happens. I mean, for the past 100 years, people always win, not the government, not the dictator.
Since last Sunday's huge rally in Victoria Park, there's been something of a lull in the protests, a chance to evaluate the response from Hong Kong's administration. China, however, has not let up with its pressure tactics on the protesters.
The latest casualty of pressure from Beijing is flight attendant Rebecca Tsai. She claims her employer, Cathay Pacific, which is based in Hong Kong, but regulated in China, snooped on her Facebook page and fired her after finding something anti-government they didn't like.
All my colleagues are all terrified because of this white terror.
White terror is a term people here use to describe a climate of fear. The protesters have been cautious of late about doing anything that paints them as extremists. But tomorrow, some plan to return to the international airport to clog up access roads. And the scene may not be as peaceful as the one on this night. Chris Brown, CBC News, Hong Kong.
Here are some of the other stories we're following tonight. A video circulating online has caught the attention of police in Ontario. The short 3-second video appears to show a young man throwing a construction sign off a highway overpass and onto the busy QEW just west of Toronto. Police say the behavior in the video is extremely dangerous and are now looking for those involved.
It's an absolutely foolish thing to do. It's completely dangerous and it's criminal. You know, somebody doing this sort of thing could be looking at a criminal charge.
Investigators don't know when the video was taken, but they do know it happened on the Winston Churchill Boulevard overpass in Oakville. Air Canada a step closer to taking over the charter service Air Transat. Transat shareholders voted almost unanimously today to approve the $720 million deal. But it's expected to face scrutiny from regulators since it would mean less competition in the travel market. And Canadian authorities have canceled the deportation of former Somali refugee and foster child Abdullahi Elmi. His lawyer says Ottawa accepted a request by the United Nations to delay taking action until his case can be examined further. Elmi was set to be deported next Monday based on his criminal convictions, but advocates argued he deserves special consideration because he grew up in Canada and was a ward of the state. The driver of a double-decker bus that careened into an Ottawa bus shelter earlier this year is now facing more than 36 charges. The bus had been packed with passengers heading home for the weekend. 3 people lost their lives, others were critically injured. And as Ashley Burke explains, some are still dealing with invisible scars.
Almost 8 months later, Catherine Rose still has a hard time getting on the bus.
I often let 4 buses go by because I can't get on a double-decker.
She's been diagnosed with PTSD and only rides single-level buses now. Even then, she has her moments.
If there's a bump or, you know, a mean swerve that might remind me, even if I'm reading, like it'll just take me out of the reality and I'll just be like, boom, right back. And
Rose was sitting on the upper deck of the bus that day when it smashed into an overhang of a transit shelter.
And it tore through a bus like butter, like a knife through hot butter. Like it's just shocking.
3 passengers died, 23 were taken to hospital.
It was a very traumatic incident for our community.
Today, police announced the bus driver is now charged with 3 counts of dangerous driving causing death and 35 charges of dangerous driving causing bodily harm, to include all psychological and physical injuries.
It led an exhaustive investigation that included technical aspects, that included reconstruction, that included, as I indicated, interviewing of about 100 different people, some involved, some witnesses.
The driver, 42-year-old Aissatou Diallo, had been on the job for less than a year and was involved in another crash between 2 buses just a month earlier. That raised questions about how the city trains and vets drivers, but today police found the City of Ottawa bears no criminal responsibility.
At least we're moving forward, I guess. I don't know that it brings any comfort, the way it maybe if it had just been road conditions that caused the accident. And I'm feeling for the families of the deceased and the badly injured as well at this point, because this can't provide them with much comfort either.
Rose is part of a class action lawsuit against the city. Her hope that this tragedy can serve as a lesson.
This has to be about change. This can't happen again.
The driver is expected to appear in court in September. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
Ahead on The National, the power of the mouse, how Disney's Magic Kingdom isn't showing signs of slowing down.
Plus, why islanders are being priced out, the real estate trend that might just surprise you.
You have to be willing to jump on a property as soon as you see it, if it fits your needs in any way.
Almost always we're bidding against people that are turning things into Airbnbs.
But first, he was arguably one of the most influential people in U.S. politics and one of the world's richest people. David Koch has died. He and his brother Charles built their father's company into the second biggest in the United States. David was worth $50 billion, much of it flowing from petroleum. They were once major players in Alberta's oil sands, but their influence goes well beyond business.
David Koch ran for office in America in 1980 and got absolutely nowhere because his views and Charles' views were regarded as so far out on the right fringe, they were just really not popular.
So the Kochs spent a fortune to shift U.S. opinion, funding think tanks, academic programs, and political campaigns, all to promote smaller government, lower taxes, and climate change denial. But David Koch also richly supported the arts.
He was generous to all kinds of foundations, all over New York, from the library to the museum. It was just one thing after another.
He began giving in earnest after surviving a runway collision in 1991. The next year, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer.
Of course, he lived a long time, and he personally attributes that, he said, it's because of great doctors, superior medicine, and my stubbornness did I live.
Sticker shock isn't unusual for home buyers in cities like Toronto and Vancouver, but it used to be in Charlottetown, at least until recently. According to the Canadian Real Estate Association, home prices in the city jumped more than 38% in the past 3 years. By comparison, prices increased by about 33% in Victoria and 25% in Canada's biggest city, Toronto. Only parts of Vancouver Island and the Niagara region in Ontario grew faster than Charlottetown. As Elizabeth McMillan tells us, the prices are now so high, some young families are thinking about packing up and leaving.
Tristan Gray and Sarah Dennis's kitchen is feeling more cramped these days. Their family has grown since they bought their downtown home 2 years ago. They want something larger, but haven't been able to find a house they can afford.
You have to be willing to jump on a property as soon as you see it, if it fits your needs in any way.
Almost always we're bidding against people that are turning things into Airbnbs.
Mm-hmm. More and more of the tourists who flock to Charlottetown during the summer months are staying in short-term rentals, creating less available housing in the city, and the province's population is growing. In the past decade, about 12,000 people have immigrated to PEI. While the majority have not stayed, thousands have, and they bought homes here. Realtors say people from other parts of the country are also buying on the island, attracted to the relatively low prices and in some cases, the investment potential.
People are banging on doors saying, hey, I really like your house, would you be interested in selling? And some people say, yes, maybe we are if the price is right.
With demand outpacing the number of new builds, rent has gone up too. The vacancy rate hovers around 0.2%. The average price of a home has jumped from about $200,000 to nearly $280,000 in just 3 years.
I think, as we get some more supply in, that's going to settle it down a bit more.
But not soon enough for Dee Mingell and Ainsley Kendrick. They're packing up their apartment to move to a rural part of the island. They couldn't find a house in their price range in the city. They came to PEI from Toronto 2 years ago. Though the housing prices here are enviable to their friends, the couple who work in the tourism industry now earn half as much as they did.
And for people in an industry like ours, it's seasonal. So we're not working for government. Yeah. We're not, nothing is guaranteed for us. If the cruise ships stop coming, there goes half of our business.
Meanwhile, Dennis and Gray are keeping a close eye on every new listing. They've started writing descriptions of their family and offers to people selling their homes. They even include a picture of their son.
We're trying to say that we're a young family that has expanding needs and are looking for something that we can grow into, somewhere where he can make new friends.
For now, they've been pondering moving to another province where they could earn more and rentals are easier to find. Elizabeth McMillan, CBC News, Charlottetown.
It is a beautiful city. Ahead on The National, after weeks of late-night jokes, the town of Dildo, Newfoundland, is having the last laugh.
But first, what Disney's expanding empire means for viewers and small business owners.
There is one large studio that makes brilliant content that's quite entertaining, but they know that, and so they demand a lot for it. Not just money-wise, but time-wise.
We're following several developing stories tonight, including new revelations about the health of U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
I have said many times that I will do this job as long as I can do it full steam.
The 86-year-old recently underwent 3 weeks of radiation after a malignant tumor was found on her pancreas last month. The U.S. Supreme Court says there's no evidence of the disease elsewhere in her body. This is the fourth time Ginsburg has faced cancer. Health officials in Illinois reporting what could be the first death in the United States linked to vaping. The Department of Health says an adult who had recently vaped died after being hospitalized with severe respiratory illness. This comes amid an outbreak of lung disease across the U.S., which officials say may be linked to the use of e-cigarettes. And Calgary-based TC Energy is one step closer to building the contentious Keystone XL pipeline. Nebraska's highest court has given the project the go-ahead, but will force the pipeline to take a different route than originally planned. The long-delayed project aims to move crude from the Alberta oil sands to refineries in Texas. Opponents are hoping to block or delay construction until at least after the 2020 U.S. presidential election.
Now to the growing footprint of an entertainment titan. Disney is one mighty mouse. Today, in just one day, Disney Parks unveiled its concept for a Star Wars hotel where guests are supposed to feel like they're staying in space. It also revealed the new attraction planned for Epcot Center in Florida, based on the Moana movie, and offered the vision for Avengers Campus, a superhero Disneyland planned for California and Paris. Disney pulls in billions with its blockbuster brands and multiple platforms, and as Eli Glasner tells us, a string of acquisitions now gives it unprecedented power in the marketplace.
Here comes Joker and Poison Ivy.
Fan Expo is the largest convention of its kind in Canada. People come to show off costumes and mix with characters from their favorite franchises. In the world of film, no one owns more fan-friendly content than Walt Disney Studios. From Star Wars to Frozen, from Avatar to Avengers, they're all inside the walls of the Magic Kingdom. The house that Walt built is now the biggest studio in Hollywood after buying Pixar, Marvel, Lucasfilm, and 20th Century Fox. This year alone, Disney claimed 37% of the box office in the US and Canada, and yet the mouse wants more.
You're coming with us.
This week, Sony Pictures walked away from a deal to share the Spider-Man character, reportedly because Disney wanted half of the profits. So Spidey won't be swinging with the Avengers anytime soon.
It's a disgrace, right? I'm sure the fans are uproared right now.
I just hope that Tom Holland still gets to be Spider-Man.
It was nice to see him play a teenager with the tutelage of other heroes.
Right. Well, as Belle, I can't say anything about that, but...
But Disney's dominance goes beyond heroes. The studio flexes its own muscles all year round at the multiplex.
The release calendar is like a giant chessboard, and all the other studios have to figure out, where are we going to put our movie, and when is Disney opening a movie? Because if you go head-to-head with Disney, you might get run over like a steamroller.
Already, the top 5 films for 2019 are all owned by Disney. This Hollywood watcher says the key to competing with the mouse is to make movies Mickey won't touch.
It's pretty telling that the two big hits this year that Disney was not in some way responsible for was Us and John Wick 3. Neither of which are movies that Disney really could make right now.
But as the studio grows, little guys can feel squeezed.
Over there will be where the screen is.
At the Brackley Drive-In Theater in PEI, Bob Boyle says he's spending $350,000 to build a second screen because of Disney.
There is one large studio that makes brilliant content that's quite entertaining, but they know that, and so they demand a lot for it. Not just money-wise, but time-wise.
Boyle says Disney demands he run their films a minimum of 3 weeks. He needs that second screen to show other titles in a timely manner. Cinema chains big and small are anxious to see what comes next, as Disney spends the weekend hatching future hits at its own fan convention, relying heavily on familiar films from the past. Eli Glasner, CBC News, Toronto.
When we come back, inside Russia's Arctic ambitions, we revisit how that country is shifting its focus north.
As the polar ice melts, northern nations are rushing to exert their control. And with its new fleet of modern icebreakers, Russia is way out in front.
Russia's nuclear power program set sail today, literally, with its first floating plant. It left from the Arctic port of Murmansk and will be towed 5,000 kilometers to eastern Siberia, where it will supply power to 50,000 people in a pretty isolated region. It will also boost electricity to a mining complex and offshore oil rigs. The vessel has been condemned by environmental groups, including Greenpeace, which has referred to it as a floating Chernobyl. This is just the latest example of Russia's investment in the far north. Tonight, we are revisiting a story by Chris Brown on what those Arctic ambitions really look like.
The recent launch of the world's most powerful icebreaker was a proud moment for many Russians.
Это очень большой, грандиозный праздник для России, потому что Россия всегда была главной морской державой, и для нас, в том числе, корабли для Севера имеют огромное значение.
As the polar ice melts, northern nations are rushing to exert their control. And with its new fleet of modern icebreakers, Russia is way out in front. This is a Ural. It's able to crunch through almost 3 meters of ice, and its nuclear-powered engines give it almost unlimited endurance. Russia has 2 other ships just like this one already, and 6 even larger icebreakers on the way.
Конечно, важно, потому что сейчас все знают, да, что в Арктике очень большие запасы нефти, газа, и стратегически важно иметь такие суда для того, чтобы организовывать и добычу, и вот проводку больших судов.
There's no discussion here about a climate emergency. The talk is only about opportunity. Canada needs icebreakers to compete, taunted the Russian shipyard official. Our shipyard can build them for you, goads another. Russia's economy is almost entirely dependent on oil and gas, and with an estimated 22% of the world's undiscovered reserves in the Arctic, Russia is pushing to unlock all it can. At this year's Arctic Forum, President Vladimir Putin said the icebreaker fleet is key to getting resources to market year-round through the Northern Sea Passage over the top of Russia.
Наша цель существенно нарастить здесь объем грузоперевозок. Только по Севморпути до 80 миллионов тонн уже к 2025 году.
Seeing the gigantic new industrial projects really drives home the scale of Russia's ambitions for the Arctic. This is the centerpiece, Yamal LNG. It's an enormous liquefied natural gas plant built on Siberia's frozen tundra at 70 degrees north. A few months back, our crew got a quick tour of the year-old facility. It has its own airport, seaport, and it's large enough to accommodate 30,000 fly-in workers. We also saw the Christophe de Marguerite. It's a new ice-capable tanker based here year-round thanks to the thinning Arctic ice. Thousands of kilometers to the west, Murmansk, already the world's largest Arctic community with a population of over 300,000, is also expanding. This vast site will be a new port with a rail link to the south. But all of these potentially lucrative Arctic opportunities also come with great challenges
and great risks. Environmental journalist Anna Kiriva grew up here.
I love Murmansk.
And she worries about how these projects will affect the delicate northern ecosystem.
I've seen how bad we can do. I haven't seen how we can improve it.
Kiriva took us to the town of Nickel. It's the site of a metal smelter that's been belching away for 70 years. The slow-growing Arctic trees nearby are blackened and poisoned by sulfur dioxide emissions. The lifeless landscape may take decades to recover, if it ever does.
The nature heals itself very slowly, and only if you decrease the amount of production. The emissions were so huge that it will take quite some time to rehabilitate the territory.
There's concern as well about the impact of all that new Arctic shipping. Some here even tout the Northern Sea as a possible rival for the Suez Canal, as it cuts down the trip from Europe to Asia by 10 days. But barely anyone lives along the route, and there are very few search and rescue stations in the Arctic in case of trouble.
What if there would be a disaster and some ship would sink, and it would be somewhere in the, I don't know, Siberian waters? Where will you bring the people?
Along with the industrial buildup, there's been a military one too.
Strategically, the attraction of Russia to the Arctic is evident. Japan lies to the east and NATO to the west, but up here, Russia is unchallenged.
Russia has been refitting Soviet-era military bases to demonstrate its willingness to enforce its Arctic claims. Whether that's evidence of aggressive intentions or legitimate defensive posturing, Russia has been very open about what it's up to in the Arctic, nor has the Kremlin shied away from inviting international experts to scrutinize the projects. British ecologist Terry Vincent Callahan was on the same tour of Yamal and the nearby city of Salakard, and he came away conflicted.
On one hand, we saw an exceptional development in the Arctic, which is not easy to accomplish. It's a huge development, and that development does some good, but at the same time, I'm an ecologist, so an environmentalist, so I worry about losing tundra for yet another big oil and gas development.
He says industrial activity in the Arctic, especially emissions and particles from stacks, can dramatically increase the rate of global warming.
That finds its way onto the Greenland ice sheet, onto the pure ice and snow of the high Arctic islands, so the snow starts melting faster.
Over the generations, Russia's northern indigenous people have been hurt more than most from Arctic development. In Soviet times, many were forcibly removed from their communities to make room for military bases. Today, most have their livelihoods tied to reindeer or caribou herding.
Да, прадедушка, дедушка и мой отец все уже оленеводы были.
19-year-old Maxime Okoto told us they're learning to live with the disruption to migration routes and all of the new industry. But when we went to the home of the Sami people, about 200 kilometers from Murmansk, we heard a different story.
Вы сейчас так смотрели, это такое грандиозное, что ощущение такое, знаете, что мы совсем песчинка в этом мире, и что на самом деле никому не будет интересно, что будет с нами происходить.
Valentina Sovkina is an activist here. The Sami number only around 1,700 people in Russia, but their communities have been here for thousands of years.
Коренные народы, хранители Арктики, они ее сохранили в той первозданной, как говорится, чистоте и красоте.
She told us their experience dealing with big corporations has not been good.
Мы обращались в Норильский никель, и мы хотели вот именно вот эти провести согласования с представителями промышленности о том, чтобы выделять определенный процент от деятельности для того, чтобы мы могли помогать сохранять самскую идентичность, так называемую. С нами просто, фактически не стали разговаривать.
Were this Arctic landscape in Canada, there'd be perhaps years of assessments and then years of debate. But in Russia, the Putin government, faced with a sluggish economy and crippling foreign sanctions, has said everything. Shipping, LNG, resource development is now all full speed ahead.
I think, unfortunately, the world will need oil and gas for decades. So all the countries who have oil and gas, they will develop it, even in the Arctic. And they will go further and further to the Arctic to continue developing it.
There's still much that could go wrong with Russia's big Arctic bet. Energy prices could crash, maybe alternative fuels will gain traction. But if not, Russia and its new fleet of icebreakers are in a commanding position to call the shots in the Arctic. Chris Brown, CBC News, in Murmansk.
Next on The National, a summer camp talent show that's more than song and dance.
When I came first to Canada, I was like, damn, I came to this summer camp and I had people who helped.
What these new Canadians want you to know, that is next in tonight's moment. But first,
Dildo needs a captain. I would love to steer this ship. Jimmy Kimmel, mayor of Dildo.
in case you missed it, Dildo, Newfoundland is still reaping the rewards of late-night host Jimmy Kimmel's month-long obsession with the town. His satirical campaign to become the mayor of Dildo and local reporting from his sidekick Guillermo has, according to the provincial government, already boosted tourism.
Jimmy for Dildo!
Jimmy for Dildo!
Jimmy for Dildo!
Jimmy Canna is very weird!
It certainly has been a publicity windfall. The tourism department says it's the equivalent of roughly $12 million worth of advertising, just shy of the province's $13 million annual marketing budget.
But as Guillermo knows and your staff know, and as the honorary mayor, you now know, we have some of the most amazing people on earth.
That is for sure.
For weeks, Kimmel's good-natured, if sophomoric running joke about the town's name has put Dildo on the map of his U.S. viewers. The tourism minister, Christopher Mitchell-Moore, says everyone in the industry is beyond happy, so much so they plan to study the Kimmel effect when thinking about the provincial brand going forward. We're looking forward to seeing those ads. Starting at a new school, well, that's hard, but imagine starting at a new school in a new country. That takes extra grit. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, there's a little extra help. It comes in the form of a summer camp for newcomers, a way for them to practice English and meet friends. And today, the students capped off their summer with a talent show. That celebration is tonight's moment.
You feel that you aren't only the different person that like he's at school or stuff.
When I came first to Canada, I was like them. I came to this summer camp and I had people who helped. So I was here to help them. I learned we're all the same from each country. We're all the same, and it's hard to learn new language, but if you practice, you got this.
This is the wonderful opportunity that we give to our children to make some new friends. Regardless of where you are from, you're coming together, learning English in the same time, and also having some fun.
I'm gonna miss my friends, but I'm gonna see them. They will come, they'll visit me sometimes, I'll go to their house sometimes.
You gotta love summer camp. So many summer camp stories happening right now. Lots of tears as kids say goodbye. These kids, it seems, most of them have only been in the country for less than a year. And according to the people behind it, some of them come to the camp sort of uncomfortable, saying hello in English and leave, being prepared to perform Baby Shark on stage, which is not so bad.
I so much want to ask you to do that right now, but I won't, Adrian. Although nice, by the way, to be on the air with you for the first time between assignments and vacation. We haven't been side by side for a while. The other thing about that story connects to a story earlier in the show. I think there were 12,000 immigrants to to Newfoundland and Labrador in the last year. Their stats also 12,000 to PEI. We saw that in an earlier story. So some good news for Atlantic Canada, I think. That is the National for August 23rd. Good night.
Good night.